everybody? It's your boy Gsluke here for our weekly DFS core picks, this time for the Charles Schwab Challenge. In this quick video, we're going over my top 6 picks for this week's slate, and I'm going to be getting significant leverage onto the field, whether they're chalky or low-owned plays. These are some of my favorite options, whether it's in the outright, DFS, whatever market that you're in. These players, I expect to have a solid performance here. And last week, just a little bit of a look back to the PGA Championship before we hop on into it, which ended up being an extremely entertaining event. I mean, first off, Justin Thomas winning was probably the best option we could have had. I did an outright bet on him, a lot of leverage in DFS, and overall, he's my second favorite player in the world, so I cannot complain at all on that front. It was unfortunate to see Mito choke that. I also had exposure there, no outright bet, but you know he's a sweetheart of mine here on the channel. And Will Zalatoris, a sleeper pick for us, almost ended up winning as well, but no dice, right? He's been close 2 times around. I'm sure Will Zalatoris will get his major championship here at some point, but either way, a profitable week. We hit the outright. DFS was just a slightly profitable week, was actually our worst platform last week because Prize Picks was an absolute ATM. So overall, cannot complain about the PGA Championship, but we're on to this week at Colonial, which is another Perry Maxwell design, just down in Texas, similar wind conditions, and overall would have a similar feel. I mean, I know one was a major championship, one is, you know, an invitational type of event, but at least the look, the feel, the conditions, even the skill set for success this week is going to be similar to what we had last time around. So with a lot to talk about, of course, the core picks to get to you guys. Let's go ahead and hop right on into it. All right, and now for the core picks. You can see our projections on the screen. I'll remind you, if you want access to these, they are on my Patreon page. So just $1 for the month. A link is in the description to this video to go ahead and do so. But let's start with the key stat review, right? So over here on the key stats tab, let's talk about what I'm using to identify key players this week. So up top, shots gained approach should not be a surprise to anyone there. But more importantly, we are taking a look at that 50 to 125, that 175 to 200, and that 125 to 150 range a lot more than most. It's a little bit of a shorter golf course, right? Just 7,200 yards, but you also have plenty of longer par 3s that are in that 175 to 200 range. Some of them can be tipped out at 200 to 220 yards, but most of the time you're going to see the staff, or PGA Tour staff that is, put them in that 175 to 200. At least last year, that's where a vast majority of those shots came from. So that's why those 3 categories are at the top of the list. Also looking at putting at number 2, which might be a surprise here for the channel. I'm much more of a ball striking specialist, right? Somebody that looks into that a little bit more than I do the flat stick. But this week, you know, time and time again, we've seen it over the years. At Colonial, guys that can putt can win. We've seen guys like Kevin Na win. Daniel Berger can be a solid putter. And even last year's champion, Jason Kokrak, has been an unbelievable putter for the last year and a half. So you certainly have to be getting it done with the flat stick, most specifically on bent grass, which is the surface for this week. Also taking a look at recent form and baseline with their putting. Also looking at shots gained off the tee, but more specifically, a little bit more emphasis on accuracy over distance this week. We have 12 par 4s, so that has a little bit of extra weighting there. Taking a look at how players play in Texas, a lot of that has to do with the wind, also the firm and fast conditions that we have in this type of the country. Shots gained approach out of the rough. We have some 3-inch Bermuda grass rough. Could be difficult for some of these shorter players or people that just aren't used to it. Shots gained around the green and birdie or better percentage round out the bunch. But now let's hop into the plays. So in general, right, just a synopsis from that. It's a short positional golf course. It's a Perry Maxwell design, so you know when you miss, you're going to have some type of a penalty, and that's why last year at the top of the leaderboard, you have plenty of people that lost around the green. I don't know the exact number, but I know, you know, at least half of the top 25 actually lost around the green, and that's because you have relatively small targets here, and it's all about hitting those targets, right? Making sure that you're not out of position to begin with, and if you miss greens, you know, you're likely to bleed a few strokes to the field. That's just going to be something that happens, and with the guys at the top, you can see that there was a lot more emphasis on that ball striking, on that putting, than it was around the green. So you'll see guys like Viktor Hovland here at $10,000 as our spend up option. You know, I'm one for kind of ragging on Hovland's around the green play because it is really that bad. It's the worst on the PGA Tour. But at a venue like this, Mayakoba Championship, Hero World Challenge, you know, this isn't quite a resort style golf course, but it's certainly a golf course where you can get away with not being so good around the green. So at $10,000, this is one of the 5 to 10 tracks on the PGA Tour that I think Viktor Hovland is a must play and not a lock, right? It's not like he's going to go out there and win this golf tournament every single time, but his upside is much higher at this type of golf course than it was last week at Southern Hills. Southern Hills, much more priority in actually hitting greens there. There's a lot more difficulty at that golf course than what you have here at Colonial, mostly due to the greens. There's less undulation here at Colonial than what we had at Southern Hills. They're going to be running slower here at Colonial. Not major championship type conditions. They're not trying to kill them out there. And in general, I expect the conditions from the weather standpoint to not be quite as severe as what we had up there in Tulsa. So all of that plays directly into Hovland's skill set, because if he's hitting 14, 15 greens in regulation, not only is he going to be putting himself a lot closer than his peers, he's also a pretty solid putter most of the time. Now, if you take a look at his last 24 measured rounds, that has not been the case, and that's why we've seen a drop-off in his performance. In fact, he's losing around the green like you'd expect, but he's losing close to a quarter of a stroke per round, and that's why the recent form, if we take a look at the finishes, hasn't really been there either. I mean, 41st at the PGA, that is underwhelming for a Viktor Hovland. Him and Morikawa finished 29th at the Zurich. That was underperforming. 27th at the Masters. I mean, you name it, right? We're expecting this guy to be in the top 10 or even top 5 pretty much week in and week out, and that is because of the ball striking. I mean, take a look at it. Gaining over a stroke per round on approach. Unbelievable stuff. 1.12 per round. Gaining over half a stroke per round off the tee. He's one of the only players in the world, maybe a la Viktor Hovland and Rory McIlroy, right, that go out there and hit it a long way, 320 plus yards, and are extremely accurate. And at Colonial, that is the ticket to going out there and taking this place low. I mean, if you saw the course breakdown video, if not, go ahead and watch that right now. It's some really good stuff. We break this place down hole by hole. There's a lot of holes where if you're accurate off the tee, you have the stones to go out there and really push it down the fairway, you can get a significant edge to the rest of the field. So Viktor Hovland, with that type of skill set, with the approach play we know he has, and in general, he's a really solid putter. We just haven't seen it of late. I mean, if you take a look at the last 50 measured rounds, he is a positive putter to the field. He goes out there just even as a neutral putter this week, he's going to finish in the top 10. If he goes out there and gains to the field like he's more than capable of, he's again gaining to the field over his last 50 measured rounds. A lot of that has been pop, where he goes out there and gains 3 to 4 strokes to the field, goes out there and loses 3 to 4 strokes to the field the next week. If we get the positive end of that volatility, Viktor Hovland wins this by 5 strokes. This is a perfect golf course for him when he's playing his best golf, and I think that's the huge caveat there. That's why he's not a lock, right? There's times where he loses to the field with the flat stick. There's times where he's not his sharpest self off the tee. So he's a large field GPP type of play, maybe not so much a play in cash. I'd probably reserve Jordan Spieth for that type of role, but in terms of trying to get leverage, maybe somebody that's a little bit lower owned than he should be because of the recent form, that is going to be Viktor Hovland at $10,000. All right, and our second man in is going to be Abraham Ancer at $9,300. And now, Abraham Ancer, not really somebody I like talking about all that much, particularly over the last 2 to 3 months where he's been atrocious. That's just the best way to put it. At best, finishing like in the 20s, top 30s at the very best for pretty much the last 3, even 4 months at this point. And last week, at a major championship, PGA championship, finally came through and broke that streak of just mediocre play. And now it wasn't horrible. He was still making a ton of cuts. He just wasn't having any type of upside. It just wasn't going out there and piecing it together for 4 rounds at a time. And even though it was only 3 rounds this time at the PGA Championship, he still had more than a respectable performance. In fact, with his irons, had his best week for quite some time. The putter was electric last week. He was super accurate off the tee, which proved to be extremely useful at Southern Hills. And this week at Colonial, another Perry Maxwell design is also going to be extremely valuable. So from a skill set perspective, absolutely love Abraham Ancer. I think the price tag at $9,300 is more than fair considering how he played last week at the major championship. And if we take a look at the recent form metrics, outside of approach, which like we mentioned, hadn't looked very good. That's why he'd had a lot of these mediocre finishes. He's been solid off the tee, solid with his putter, and much like a Viktor Hovland, pretty atrocious around the green. In fact, of recent has been even worse than Viktor Hovland. But like I mentioned, at this golf course, a lot of the top finishers were losing to the field to begin with. So if you can lean into that off the tee play where he's gaining a ton of strokes with his accuracy, hit the ball on approach like he did last week, and continue to putt the ball at the level he has, I mean, the sky's the limit, right? Just replicate what you did last week. He probably goes out there and wins this event, I mean, considering the field strength. So love him there at that price tag. If you take a look at the recent form, you'll see, of course, one of his best finishes was last week where he finished there in 9th, but 56, he at least made the cut at Wells Fargo, made the cut at the Mexico Open, did miss the cut at the Masters, which is slightly concerning considering how easy it is to make the cut there. But he was in a rough stretch of form, right? We got to get past that. That's why he's only number 26 in my modeling. A lot of that stretch is still included with a lot of these recent form metrics. If we take a look at the last 50 measured rounds, you will start to see some of the concern. I mean, off the tee, he's still a gainer to the field. Same thing with approach. The putter, not quite as electric. So certainly of late, he's been putting the ball, but bent grass is one of his favorite surfaces. In fact, if we take a look at his putting metrics, he's still favorable on bent grass compared to how he's putted over his last 50 measured rounds. So if anything, we'd expect him to actually positively regress on the surface this week, which makes him just an even stronger play in my opinion. So at $9,300, a core pick for us, going to be in plenty of my lineups. Next up, we're going to talk about Taylor Gooch as one of our bread and butter plays this week. He's here at $8,900. And last week, another solid performer at the PGA. And something I want to mention now, this will be a trend throughout all 6 picks. All of them made the cut at the PGA, and all of them had solid finishes, all finished in the top 35 of the event. The reason why I'm tuning into that is, first off, last week, a Perry Maxwell design. This week, Perry Maxwell design. Also, similar skill sets needed for both golf courses. Like I said, driving accuracy proved to be extremely important at last week's venue. And this week, approach play, very similar to last week. And putting is how you're going to get it done. Now, one going to be much more difficult than the other. We saw a 5-under winner for last week's event. I'd expect something in that 15-under range to win this week. The skill set comp, or I should say just correlation between these golf courses is going to be drastic, right? So guys like a Taylor Gooch that found so much success with the ball striking last week, I'd expect that to continue this time around. And like I said, given the field strength, why not finish in the top 5 or win this time around? So if you take a look at the recent form, you can see Taylor Gooch hadn't really been his best self, but last week at the PGA really showed us a whole lot with that top 20 finish. It was a missed cut before that. It was 21st at the Zurich. That's not all that impressive considering that's a team event. 14th at the Masters was pretty solid, so he's starting to trend in the right direction. If we take a look at the course history for Gooch, it isn't all that ideal. You can see he finished in 14th here, 43rd, 29th, so at least he was making cuts. So nothing really flashy at this point, but the only missed cut was whole way back in 2018. So if you're looking for a relatively high upside play here, somebody that could potentially go out there, make a cut. If he has the putting upside like we saw last week, top 25 finish is his floor. He won at a similar golf course at the RSM Classic, so he certainly has shown that upside as well. But in either circumstance, one of the safest plays on the board in my opinion, just because he's so solid, right? He gains on approach, he gains with the putter. In general, he's more of an accuracy over a distance guy. We've seen that at the Players Championship. When he has to be accurate off a tee, he has to club down, which you're going to see a lot of players, including Taylor Gooch, do this week. He loves those type of golf courses. I mean, I think the best example of that would be a TPC Sawgrass, where Taylor Gooch has pretty much been an ATM for us here in DFS. So like I'm there at that price tag. You can see on bent grass, he's also better than his 50-round baseline when it comes to putting. So we could potentially even see some positive regression for the guy here on this surface. So like I'm there at that price tag, I'm going to be in the player pool. All right, next up is Kevin Na at $8,100, and he's somebody who's had a ton of success at this golf course. So if we bring up the course history, you'll see that, of course, he has the win here in 2019, a 4th place in 2018, and even last year when he didn't have his best stuff, was able to squeak out a 32nd place finish, and it makes a lot of sense. Kevin Na, a relatively short player, definitely emphasizes precision over power when it comes to his game. Going to be a perfect course fit, right? Going to fit like a glove here at Colonial Country Club. If you take a look at the recent form, he's also starting to round into form. So top 23 finish last week at a similar comp course, like a lot of the other players on this list. We've already talked about that. 42nd at Mexico, 26th at the Heritage, 14th at the Masters. Before that, it was a lot of missed cuts or, just 40th, 50th place finish. He's starting to trend in the right direction. And for Kevin Na, he's not the most consistent player, but when you start to get that consistent Kevin Na that's starting to model well, you can see he's number 19 in my Colonial Fit, number 48 in terms of recent form. That's when he's an especially dangerous golfer. This guy tends to win once a year, and what better place than Colonial Country Club? So I'm going to have a ton of Kevin Na this week. In fact, I'm very likely to go out and bet him this week. If we take a look at the recent form metrics, he's been pretty sneaky, to say the least, especially with his approach play, where he's gaining over 3/4 of a stroke per round. And Kevin Na going out there and gaining a ton of strokes to the field with the approach play, that's exactly how he goes out there and wins golf tournaments, because you cannot find a better putter when he's on his game. Now, of late, the putter has been up and down, right? He's actually had golf tournaments where he's lost to the field with the flat stick, which, if you know Kevin Na's game, that is extremely rare for the guy. I would expect that to turn around sooner rather than later. And off the tee, he's been extremely inaccurate, which, if you know Kevin Na's game, is also extremely irregular. So if you're looking for recent form, if you're looking for somebody that models extremely well, right, like top 10 model fit, right, go to Amito Pereira, right? He's going to be extremely chalky after last week. Go to somebody like a Chris Kirk, whose ball striking stats are otherworldly. If you're looking for somebody with immense upside, take a look. His numbers on bent grass are a third of a stroke better per round than what he's done over the last 50 measured rounds. Then go to Kevin Na, because the ball striking, especially with the approach play, you're not going to find him any hotter stretch of golf. And like I said, that is when he's most dangerous. If you take a look at the last 50 measured rounds, he actually becomes even more favorable. Starts to gain, a little bit less on approach, but a little bit more off the tee. Around the green and the putting gets slightly more favorable. So Kevin Na, like I said, more of a short game specialist, more of a precision over a power guy. And given the fact that he's already won here and shown that upside, why not again, right? He's a little bit of a polarizing character. A lot of people don't really like to root for the guy, but can't really argue against the course fit this week. He fits the place like a glove, like I said, and is certainly going to be in the player pool. Next up, we have Brian Harman at $7,800, and another player who's had some success at this golf course. And while it hasn't been anything drastic, right, we take a look at his record here over here on the course history tab, not the recent form tab. You can see he has a top 10 finish here last year, has a top 10 finish in 2017, but a bunch of made cuts, right? 14th, 31st, 23rd place finish. Just an absolute print fest when it comes to this Charles Schwab Challenge. We take a look at the recent form over here. You also see that he's starting to round into form in that category. It's been much more consistent over these last 9 events than he has over the rest of his season. 34th last week, 9th at the Wells Fargo, 35th at the RBC. Now missed cut at the Masters. It is what it is, right? He's going to have a bad performance from time to time. But in the end stretch of 2021, or even the fall stretch, it was real ugly for Brian Harman. He was missing quite a few cuts. If you take a look at the last 50 measured rounds, you start to see what I'm talking about. You can see he's gaining across the board, but it's, just moderate gains across the board, right? Of late, he started to really turn it up, right? He's starting to gain many more strokes with the putt. He's starting to gain a lot more on approach. And he's still gaining across all 4 categories. So he's always a well-rounded player. He's going to grind you out cuts. He's a, relatively high floor player. But at these short positional type of golf courses where he can really tap into that elite driving accuracy that he's known for, this is where he has upside. Because if you saw the course breakdown, there are holes where you're tempted to hit driver, but unless you're an elite accuracy type of guy and you have that confidence, you're gonna lay up. You're gonna take a lot of the hazards out of play on the golf course. But for somebody like a Brian Harman that certainly has that confidence off the tee, he's going to be pushing it down there a long ways. And I know he's not a super long player, right? But if he's hitting driver when a lot of the field is hitting iron off the tee, he's going to start to have that 20 to 30 yard advantage. And that's how Jason Kokrak won last year. He was unbelievably aggressive with the driver, which was very surprising, and he kept it in play. That was the real X factor for Jason Kokrak. So Brian Harman at $7,800, I really do like here. In terms of his bent grass splits, you can see it's right around neutral, so it's not really helping him or hurting him all that much there. And like I said, with the recent form starting to trend in the right direction, him starting to be a lot more consistent here, round in and round out on the PGA Tour. Absolutely love his upside here for this tournament. Next up and lastly, we have Tom Hoge at $7,600. And Hoge has had plenty of success at my comp courses, most notably at Pebble Beach, where he ended up winning this year. And at his price tag, considering how he played last week, I think he's drastically underpriced. So first off, last week, you can see he finished in the top 10, 9th place finish, 17th at the Byron Nelson, so was certainly trending in the right direction, but that was after a really rough stretch. 2 missed cuts, a 39th place finish. I believe another missed cut before that as well. Tom Hoge wasn't looking so hot after that win. It looked like he went into a little bit of a lull, but has snapped out of it and snapped out of it in a big way, because if we take a look at the recent form metrics over the last 24 measured rounds, you'll see that he has started to gain drastically to the field. A ton on approach, a ton around the green, which again isn't going to be all that important this week, but he's gone back to being a very accurate driver. Now, while he might not be the longest player on tour, he's very similar to a Brian Harman, where he's elite with the accuracy at times. And if he is laying up, so be it, right? He's going to hit even more fairways this week. The real X factor is the putter. And if we take a look at his bent grass splits, you can see he's right around a neutral player, so it's not going to help or hurt him, but he gained a ton of strokes last week. In fact, over the first 2 rounds, he was top 5 in shots gained putting, and by the end of the week was still top 10 in shots gained putting at the PGA Championship. Those are bent grass greens, very similar to what we're going to have this week, of course, down in Texas, and very similar designer, Perry Maxwell, known for having a lot of intricate, subtle breaks to his greens, where if you use a greens reading book, you're pretty much not going to have a shot because of, all the arrows will be pointing in opposite directions. But if you're more of a natural reader of greens, kind of like Hideki Matsuyama, for example, who's had success at the Masters, or I guess a Tom Hoge who was able to do it last week, you can find some success. So perhaps there's something to that, him having success at these quote-unquote Perry Maxwell designs. If we take a look at the course history for him, let's see, down here for Tom Hoge, hasn't been very good, right? Missed cut, 40th and 42nd place finish. So this is a little bit speculative, right? But the ball striking is on another level, right? Tom Hoge, over his, last 5 or even 6 months at this point, is playing like a completely different golfer, right? The ball striking is on a completely different level. I think we need to be treating him like a completely different athlete entirely, right? Kind of like we did with Jason Kokrak. If you take a look at his first 6 to 7 years of his career, he's a completely different player now at this stage. So kind of giving him the Jason Kokrak treatment, where I'm washing a lot of those stats or a lot of those recent finishes from years prior, and just given the course fit, he's more of an accuracy guy than a power guy off the tee. The approach play and the putting that we saw last week, I think there's quite a bit of upside to be had there. That is all I've got for the core picks this week, guys. Hopefully you guys got something out of this video, perhaps a play or two that you're looking to play this week in your own lineups. In either circumstance, I appreciate you guys stopping by. Before you hop on out of here, go ahead and let me know who you've got winning this week. For me, Viktor Hovland really draws my eye, but Abraham Ancer, he really calls out my name. After last week, I was just impressed by what I saw, right? Started to look like the Abraham Ancer that won at TPC Southwind, one of my comp courses here. So a lot going for him. He's also had success at a few other comp courses as well. Meant to mention that during the core pick section, but in either circumstance, guys, right? Let me know who you've got this week down in the comments, and also go ahead and let me know why. We're going to have even more content dropping throughout the week as well, so make sure to keep an eye out for all of that. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel if you haven't already, so you don't miss any of that as well. We're going to have value picks dropping sometime tomorrow morning. Also going to have fades and sleepers, our weekly DFS live stream. You guys know the usual docket of stuff here on the channel, so keep an eye out for that, like I said. Also, best of luck with all of your lineups this week, guys, and I'll catch you guys next time.